this is Stefani Ruper. Thank you for tuning in to the Naked Humanity, Once the Meaning of Everything podcast. Today is episode number 33X, and I am going to be talking about the importance of suffering. Now, this isn't particularly related to the content that I addressed earlier this week. Earlier this week, I spoke with Jonas Kaplan, a cognitive neuroscientist in California, at a wonderful lab, and we talked about a lot of really cool and important things, specifically the self and how we construct our identity with narratives, stories we're telling about our lives constantly and about the worlds around us. And we touched on some important themes related to meditation and spiritual practice. And also recently, I did an X episode on our culture of fear. And in that episode, I talked about all the ways in which we are working to sanitize our worlds. We're working very, very hard to clean them up, to prevent ourselves from being hurt. And so I thought it could be worthwhile to dig into the concept of suffering and make sense of it in important ways, make sense of it in ways that are relevant to our lives, and maybe understand its context in a way that helps us become more comfortable with it, that can help us cope with it better, and that can help us better decide what our priorities are when we, go about the world and try to help ourselves and other people. Before jumping into all of that, of course, I have a winner to announce for the book giveaway, still going strong after 33 episodes, and the reviews do keep rolling in, although slower now. All you have to do to win a free book is write a review of the podcast, take a screenshot and email it to me, Stephanie@nakedhumanity.org. Now is the new email address, so you can @ me at Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. I will get it, I promise. Just send me a message, and then you will be permanently entered into a drawing to get a free book, which is really exciting. This week's winner, her name is Sylvia Park, and she chose a book called Sex at Dawn. It's actually a pretty popular choice. Lots of people choose Sex at Dawn. It's a great book about the history of sexuality, and it proposes that our sort of idea that humans evolved in nuclear families with monogamous relationships is a little bit flawed, and we are just projecting back onto history. And this book argues that humans have a much more open sexual past, which is just fascinating and important. And I do recommend checking out Sex at Dawn or any of the other books on the list, which you can find at stephaniruper.com/book giveaway, all one word. So that's that. Thank you so much for your support as ever. So moving into today, the importance of suffering. Yeah, so I think it's worth prefacing me talking about how important suffering is with the fact that I am afraid that we are forgetting it. I understand that there is a wide range of suffering in the world, and it is really good to help people who suffer disproportionately. And definitely we want to hold space for people while they suffer and take care of one another. But that's a part of why it's important, is that it provides a way for us to support one another, which I will get to later. But as it stands, the world is full of suffering. And I think perhaps something I'm still mulling this over, but I want to think about perhaps transforming the world in terms of justice in the face of suffering, as opposed to ending suffering. And there are actually people who want to, biochemically, make it possible for humans to no longer suffer by turning off pain receptors or numbing parts of the brain or emotional circuitry that are related to pain. And I think that is hugely unwise for so many reasons. But this group of people is representative of a much larger, broader cultural project that is concerned with, the word I keep coming back to is anesthetizing, like anesthesia. It's numbing. We're numbing our world. We're seeking to make it increasingly safe. We are becoming more fragile in a way, more emotionally fragile. We want to, instead of building up our resources to cope with suffering, we want to prevent the suffering from happening altogether, or control our world so that we do not suffer. And to reiterate, I do believe, obviously, that there are many forms of suffering, and especially those associated with injustices that need to be addressed. But suffering is an inherent and important part of life. And I will tell you, I'm going to tell you why I think so. So first, on a grand metaphysical scheme, when you zoom out and take a look at our existence as a whole, suffering is important, period. It's required for having life. It's required for having good life. And this is as true for bacteria as it is for us as humans. Bacteria, or a bacterium, or any kind of life form that seeks to survive, that has desire, right? Because our genes gave it to us or whatever is making us do it. We still have that experience. And in order to seek out things that are good for us, we need to have gradations in experience. And so imagine a completely neutral world, right? Nothing would ever happen, because in order for things to remain neutral, they wouldn't be able to be qualitatively different from one another. You have to always be able to say, oh, that's a little bit better, or that's a little bit worse, or that's a lot better, or that's a lot worse. Better and worse are necessarily coupled, and you cannot have a world where they do not coexist, period. And this is why Donald Crosby, a guest who came on episodes 22 and 23, that's why Donald Crosby argues that the idea of heaven is incoherent. He thinks the idea of heaven doesn't really exist, at least the classical idea of heaven, where people are happy all the time, and that's pretty much it. And they just go about life like here on earth, but happy all the time. That's kind of, at least colloquially, culturally, how we talk about heaven. But that is incoherent, because you couldn't have graded experience. And what kind of life would it be if you just walked around like grinning all the time? And happiness is wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I love happiness, but sadness is the price that we pay in order to be able to have happiness. Because again, if you didn't, it would all be neutral. And sure, you could flood your system with dopamine and serotonin, or take ecstasy every single day or something like that, and ride on these highs, but there would still be gradations of experience within there. And you would probably come down eventually and just see the slightly less happy as more negative, right? You would inherently impose this differentiation between these two pretty good points, precisely just because we are humans that require a range of experience in order to be able to experience things. And so suffering is just like essentially, as I said, metaphysically, it is the thing that enables us to have flourishing. And it is really hard and unfortunate and sucks that we have this trade-off, but it's also a necessary fact of existing. And we have no reason to believe that there are any kind of beings that exist anywhere in the universe that have it differently. And of course, that's a really big claim to make. But my point is, so far as we can tell, life is full, life is characterized by precisely this difference. And so if we really hate suffering, or if we're in a period of our lives that is really hard, it can be useful to look at this fact and say, okay, this is my buy-in. This is what I'm paying for. And as I mentioned earlier, I do believe that justice is important, because some people are dealt a really crappy hand, right? Billions of people are dealt really crappy hands, unimaginably more crappy hands than the one that I was dealt, and that many other people are dealt. And that sits with us as unfair, and it's not fair, and it sucks. And so justice is something that I prefer to think about in terms of what we want to do for the world, is enhance justice as opposed to get rid of suffering, period. And I also believe, I want to talk about suffering now on a more personal level. I believe that suffering is important on a personal level because it is the way in which we become strong. there is no denying the fact that life is hard and life is full of risks and people die, right? Like suffering is inevitable. And if you anesthetize the world in certain ways, if you make the world increasingly safe, if you make it too safe, if you make your kids too safe, you don't ever let them get exposed to taunts from other kids. I'm not saying bullying. I'm just saying, like the vagaries of childhood, whatever, playground existence. If you don't let your kids do that, if you don't let them get disciplined at school or under whatever, all of these different things, if we overly anesthetize our worlds, then we have fewer opportunities to prepare ourselves for other instances of suffering in our lives. And, I once, years ago, when in a period of my life that was just wretchedly painful and hard for many years, just almost unbearable. It was obviously bearable. And that's the point, right? I was always I always was frustrated that I had to keep learning these lessons. And I was like, when do I stop? When does it stop? Well, it doesn't stop. And that's precisely because life continues to get more complicated and it continues to get harder. A friend of mine in college always said, growing old ain't for sissies. And that's so true. Right? Life progressively becomes more challenging. And so we need to learn. And we also we need to do this for ourselves, and we need to be able to do this for other people. And so I view suffering, instances of my suffering, as an opportunity to practice resilience. Resilience, I believe, is a underutilized concept in our society today. Resilience is different from strength. Strength is very vague and can be confusing. Strength can be construed in a number of different ways, but resilience is quite specific and is very helpful. It says basically you can endure and you can grow and you can build your resources. You can develop as a person. You can get through the hard times. And you need to be able to do this for yourself, and you need to be able to do this for other people. You won't be able to show up for either of those groups, you or other people, if you don't learn resilience, if you don't learn how to stand in the face of truly wretched things. And of course, we can let them feel wretched, and we can be sad, and we can go to therapy, and we can lay in bed and cry if we need to, or all that sort of stuff. But we need to hold the space and welcome the space of all kinds of suffering in our lives, loss and anger even, and betrayal. We need to be able to hold space for these things precisely because life needs them necessarily. Again, we return to the question of we cannot have good experiences if we do not have bad. And so the more resilient we become to the bad, the more we can open ourselves up to the good and experience the beauty of the whole palette of human experience in total. And so resilience is a highly underutilized and I think very important thing for us to do. I also discussed in the podcast I did on fear, this concept that the world will never be inherently safe. It's chaotic. It's massive. We're, constantly bumping into people and whatever. Complete safety is out of the question. And so the option to completely sanitize or anesthetize the world is, you're chasing a pipe dream when you do that. And of course, there are certain ways in which the world should be made more safe. Absolutely. And there are ways in which we should be, again, addressing injustices. But we do not so much want to run from suffering, run from things that are challenging, run from things that are hard. Rather, I think we should face them or walk towards them, embrace them, use them as opportunities to practice resilience, because then we're not desperately trying to plug holes in this, say it's a ship of the world, and trying to keep it from being bombarded. We will always be bombarded. And so rather than trying to clean up the world or being frustrated or upset that suffering exists, we can develop it within ourselves and within other people, resilience, so that the suffering can be borne in a way that feels meaningful, that feels livable, that we can put in the context of the whole narrative of our lives, and we can get on with things, and enjoy what we can and appreciate, again, the beauty of both this negative component and the positive components of life, because they all really need each other. So I talk about all of this today because I think that it can be useful just to help us make sense of suffering. I know a lot of people and of course, I have this in my own personal experience, that really, like, it sucks. It sucks to be down. It absolutely sucks. But when we understand that life is incontrovertibly bound up in suffering, and that it is the thing that makes it possible for us to be able to have goodness and enjoyment, joy, all these sorts of things, then we can almost be grateful for it. And again, see it as an opportunity, and a hard one, albeit, but an opportunity to practice resilience, to embrace that part of our humanity that can become stronger, and practice some gratitude as well. Gratitude for things that are hard is one of the harder, but more rewarding and beneficial things that we can do for ourselves, because practicing gratitude has been demonstrated time and time again in studies to be really beneficial for mental health. And also, of course, resilience, when coupled with gratitude, can really make for a powerful coping mechanism, and a healthy coping mechanism at that. So I just wanted to put that out there. I don't think we should get rid of suffering. I really don't. But fight for justice, absolutely yes. And fight for safety and justice, absolutely yes. But the human experience will forever be the human experience. And so we may as well accept that and get on with it and build our resources as we can. So I am going to leave it at that. This has been episode number 33X. I talked about the importance of suffering. If that wasn't obvious, our winner was Sylvia Park. She's fantastic. And I am so grateful to have this experience with you. Speaking of gratitude. So thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. I will, as ever, be excitedly back next week. Until then, take care.